Hey, John? Those,
For the spreadsheet for the last meeting, not last week, the spreadsheet on all the recommendations, is that you, or would that be? Do you have access to those?
Oh my.
Could you, maybe just send those out?
well, if they're May 19th, I can find them.
Yes,
It's
it
not
would
a
have been that meeting, not last week.
problem. Okay. I'm easily confused.
Now, can you hear me? All right. That may have been a blessing. All right, we'll call the meeting of the Wausau Policing Task Force to order. A roll call has been taken. We've heard from Michael Loy, who will not be able to join us tonight. Next item is approval of the minutes from the May 19th and the June 17th meeting. I would like to have the minutes reflect that both Officer Peckham and Robinson and Harris died in the active duty at the last meeting.
Well, I was alive. My person died.
Oh, sorry. That's right. Yeah, that's
There's a
right.
death involved.
Yes.
What are your wishes relative to the minutes?
I'll make a first motion to approve.
All right, there's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded by Will and by Sarah. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. The next item is a discussion of the June 7th use of force training. And Ben, again, on behalf of the task force, I would like to thank you and the members of your department for a very educational, enlightening, and traumatic evening. I think that we saw firsthand some of those decisions that you're faced with in the field, and I think that it gives us an appreciation for the whole concept of being prepared and being proactive versus reactive. And were there any other observations that members had? Pat?
Yeah, I think Ben would be probably particularly interested. This weekend I had both kids home. My 30-something daughter listened to my tale of getting shot, and I described the use of force and how the different steps were described and the different, levels of threat and presence and all that. And her immediate reaction, and I'm sure that it's out there in the public quite a bit, was, did you feel the entire night was to convince you that sometimes people just need to get shot? My answer was no. It was like, come on.
Well, I think that
Attitude is out there, that
yeah.
that the police go around saying, we need to shoot people once in a while, so you should feel good about it.
Any other observations? So Ben, how often are you providing that type of training to your officers, and what's their, I'm just interested, based upon years of experience, how do the scenarios play out differently than it did with us inexperienced individuals?
Well, I guess to answer your question, so scenarios similar to what you guys experience play out in more depth in recruit school. I mean, officers, The state of Wisconsin has implemented scenario-based training and requirements to pass and successfully complete scenarios, use of force scenarios, and multiple other type of scenarios in their basic training in the police academy. So that starts right away when people decide to be police officers and enter the police academy. And you know, we've implemented that type of training, scenario-based training, years and years ago. So we've been doing it for a long time. You know, we train with our firearms and on use of force on a monthly basis. I think, like we talked about last week at the training, you know, the minimum state requirement is just that police officers pass their firearm certification course, which is a state mandated course, once a year. And, you know, we have to have 24 hours of training to maintain that certification. But none of that is required to be use of force training. So, you know, we go well above what the state requires and mandates, because I think that's what is required of a professional police organization. And frankly, that's been in place at Wausau PD since I started there 21 years ago. So, you know, we do implement that scenario-based training on a regular basis, and put officers into a position where, you know, the stress level is up. That's our intention when we do training, is to increase their stress level, because we can't mimic what the stress is going to be in a real live incident, but we can increase their stress level in a training scenario so that they're better prepared to handle that stress when they're in a real life scenario. You know, and Mr. Peckham, I appreciate the comment that your daughter made, and I think that is, you know, police get that type of question on a regular basis. Do you try to educate the community in such a way that makes them believe that you just want to use force, or that all force is justified? That's absolutely not the case. You know, we don't want to use force at all, and I think, you know, last week, hopefully you heard that from all of our staff, and you saw that in the training. The reality is that it's complex. Those decisions that officers have to make in a split second are very complex, and that's what we're trying to convey in those scenarios, in that situation, is that, you know, it's a very difficult situation where you have so many different things you need to think about to keep citizens safe, to keep yourself safe, to keep offenders that are, you know, threatening people safe. It's a very difficult situation, and we don't want to use force. That's what we're trying to convey in that training, is the complexity of those types of decisions that officers have to make. And we don't make those decisions lightly. We don't want to have to hurt anybody. We definitely don't want to have to shoot and kill anybody. And nothing could be further from the truth in that.
Well, and the irony is that in both scenarios, it wasn't the officers that were engaged in the shooting, but rather shot at or witnessing the action. So it just makes you appreciate how quickly things happen, and how well prepared you need to be, and thoughtful in approaching a situation.
Yeah. In the case of my daughter, she was pleased, or maybe pleased is the wrong word, but she was, I guess, learned that you have a continuum of things. You don't just walk up into a situation and pull your gun and plug somebody, but you have the baton. Some officers carry pepper spray. Pretty much everybody's got a taser, and you have all those things that you can do prior to having to shoot somebody. But I think she's probably fairly typical of the population out there in terms of thinking that maybe it's a little too easy to just go to the gun. But,
And again, based upon the statistics that we have seen, the incidences are rare, that even a use of force occurs, and even more rare is the actual firing of or discharge of a firearm by an officer. So I think those are things that we need to keep in mind.
Another thought I had was that one of the things that threw me off, and I should have gotten the idea after the first real scenario, the video things that we saw all lasted quite a while. There was a lot of, it was drawn out, and there were multiple points where decisions could be made, and You stop the video, or Ben did, and we talked about, what do you do at this point, or, if they had done X at this point, would have been justified, and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden, Will and Mike go out there, and in, 25 seconds, it seemed like the guy was shooting, and in our case, we got popped pretty quick too, so I thought we were in for more of a kind of a drawn-out
Scenario.
experience, and things happen fast, and, I just still am kind of marveled that I didn't make a move, Guy hauls out a gun, I said, oh, and pow, pow, it was over,
Right.
so.
I think in my
Very quick.
experience, so I taught in Michigan, and I taught in law enforcement and criminal justice at Fair State. And one of the things that I noticed, and maybe Ben, you can comment on this, is that it takes some time. And that this is the key for the repeated training and to change it up. Because, like your daughter, the first time we saw new recruits come in, they'd pull somebody over and they'd be pulling. They'd have their first stress situation because to them, it's the practice, it's getting that comfort of, I have these options, and how socialized are they in our society about this is how police respond. And it's like, time out, you don't realize what all we do. And so I think to the police departments, credit the repeated stuff and changing them up, that it's going to be 25 seconds or it's going to be 8 hours. And to, whether it's scenario-based, problem-based, and all that stuff. But some of that what I always enjoyed watching was recruits through their time. You've got these people come in like, I'm the biggest, toughest guy. I can take someone physically right away. And then it's like, no, you're not going to take everybody physically. And for them to learn, and that's the key part, I think, in the training and the culture of academies and continuing the practice.
Yeah.
So from a task force perspective, as we look at recommendations and others, what are your thoughts as, sort of the lessons learned in the context of, as we advance policies, procedures, and make recommendations going forward, how did that enlighten us relative to potential policy and procedures issues? Any thoughts on that?
But I think I kind of just want to go back because I wanted to kind of give my thoughts, and I think as they relate, I think the things that stood out to me is obviously, as mentioned, how important the training is, how consistent the training must be, how fast a situation can escalate. As the chief has mentioned a number of times, like, over and over, hiring for character. Because if you don't have the character, or the judgment, first of all, then it doesn't matter how much training you have in terms of the person. Being able to think and react in the moment quickly, knowing when and what to use in the moment. As Pat was just mentioning the videos, even the videos, if you think about it, those videos are probably like 10 minutes. It seems so much longer, though, when you're in the situation. But you really don't have a whole lot of time to react and think. So being able to know what tools to use, have the best training, and have policies that back you up and support you, I think are important. I think as a task force, I think we're tasked with looking at those policies, obviously making sure we educate on where those policies are effective, and if there are places in the policies that could help officers in terms of being able to use more tools or in terms of how they react to the situation or what they need to do. I think doing that, or if there are gaps, looking at those as we're exploring and going through these policies. But I think just from one scenario, you learn a whole lot about what officers have to go through sometimes in these tense situations. And sometimes it could be the second, as you saw, I was talking to the guy and then, escalated quickly and he, shot himself, and that's something people see. And sometimes it's quicker. But then also thinking about, as I thought about afterward, what an officer must go through after witnessing that, or after witnessing their partner get, shot or worse, and how that affects them when they approach that next situation, and making sure there's a support system there too. So I think just within one situation, you learn a lot about what they go through. and trying to then translate that in terms of how we move forward in terms of task force and make sure that we're both looking at where those gaps are, and also looking at where we could possibly provide additional support.
So I guess with that, do you, Ben, feel that you have the support of the Police and Fire Commission and City Council to invest in training time and training, resources and staff members, that's something that, that would be a proposal or a policy we could bring out, that we need to prioritize that. And I know it puts you in an awkward situation, but, I'd be interested in your feedback on, do you feel restricted right now with opportunities you have and personnel time, staffing things to pursue this to what you feel is an appropriate amount?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I would say that, number one, I do feel supported by the Police and Fire Commissioner, City Council, and Mayor. I think they've provided a good amount of funding for training. I would say we can always do more. We can always do better, in terms of a training capacity. We have outstanding trainers within our department. We don't have anybody who's assigned a full-time job as a trainer. I'd love to have somebody that, like the fire department has a full-time trainer within their fire department to train people on EMS, paramedics, and firefighting and all those things. I'd love to have a full-time trainer on our staff that does nothing but devote their time to making sure that our staff are trained to the highest level possible. In terms of funding, training's expensive. One of the components, we just had a meeting with our union leadership today, and one of the things we talked about is the cost of training, how expensive it is. And it's expensive to send somebody to training just in terms of registration, hotels and meals and those kinds of things that we have to pay. But the other component to that is it costs overtime to send officers to training. Not always when they're at training, but we always have to have minimum numbers of officers working patrol. So there is an overtime component. So it's very costly to send somebody to training. And so I think there's room to grow in that area as well.
Do you know off the top of your head, when a police force, the size of the police force, they justify, like across the, if you would look and say, if you have X number of officers, a typical police force in the United States would have one full-time position related directly to train. Are there stats out there about that? Is there?
I don't know if there are stats out there. I don't think that there's such a thing as a typical police department.
Sure,
we've
sure,
talked about
but
that a little bit here, but I don't know what the answer to that is. That we have, a lot of departments our size don't have a crisis intervention team, don't have a victim resource unit or homelessness officer. So I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I could ask the other departments in the state of Wisconsin, who has a full-time training officer, but short of that, I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? If not, again, Ben, thank you, and thank your officers for that. It was.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
And that's to Will's point about the kind of the aftermath of some of those incidents. We've talked about the importance of officer wellness, and if there is policy that this task force could recommend in terms of making sure that officers are kept well and that we support them in terms of wellness initiatives, I think that would be an excellent consideration for the task force as well. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, citizen engagement survey update. Eric, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start off by asking for the apology or sharing an apology rather to the committee. I'm going to share it via a story. So my brother was in the Air Force Academy, my older brother, and as a plebe, I'm sure you guys have seen the movies. One of the most common refrains as a plebe is, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" And usually in some kind of prone position. So when he came home from break, he promptly taught that to his younger brothers and forced us into repeating that. So thank you to Mr. Peckham for emailing me today and saying, "Hey, Eric, it would be nice if we could have these documents a little sooner rather than later, close to the meeting." So I wanted to apologize for that delay, and it's just been part of this process of trying to get everything moving in the same page, and I realize it wasn't ideal, so I do apologize for that. And I'll just say, thank you, may I have another? If you have any more feedback like that. But I didn't really expect you to have gone through it, so let's just clear that up right away. And I realize with short notice, you probably haven't had time to really, dig into it, review it. And I think that's okay, at least in the sense that I'm not saying you have to provide comments tonight. But this is the format of the survey that's now where we are focusing on not just content, but also the actual format in the paper version. So what I sent you in that PDF was essentially what the survey looks like now and what it would look like if it was sent out tomorrow, let's say. That doesn't mean that there isn't still room for some adjustments, and we've been having some comments trickle in here and there from different members of this committee and a few other independent outside folks who've been looking at it. And we're still taking those suggestions. So both from a content perspective, but also now from a format perspective. Now is the time. If there's some when I say now, I mean in the next few days. If there's some comments about the formatting, like you might even want to print it out and just see what it looks like. Because I heard somebody today who took it said, the print was a little small, which we definitely understand and will take into consideration. And we're open to any sort of feedback around that. So I'll stop there and just see if anyone has any comments, questions about the survey itself, and then we can talk later some more about the process in a minute.
Are there any questions? All right. Go ahead on the process.
A couple things just to fill a couple blanks here real quick. I had two couple questions. One is, towards the end of the survey, if you recall, there's some conditional questions, sort of like, and a lot of them are prefaced with, within the last 12 months, have you, had this type of interaction or that type of interaction? And it's a little awkward in the paper. In the online version, it's easy because if you click yes, then it takes you automatically to the next question. If you click no, it just automatically skips the questions that you don't have to answer and goes on. So it's very easy online to do that. In the paper version, it's a little trickier because you have to, if you're the survey taker, you have to actually realize, oh, I don't have to answer these next three questions because they don't apply. So I wanted you to take a look at that section in particular and just see if it makes sense to you and if your mind logically will take you to the right place in the survey. That's just an issue we want to make sure about. Another question that came up was in demographics. I think actually it was Olivia. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, was somebody saying something, John?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I thought I heard something. All right. Olivia Rasmussen is our intern and is helping us out a little bit. And she had, or I think it was her, had made this suggestion or wondered why we didn't have income levels on the survey. And I honestly couldn't remember our discussion when we were talking about those demographic questions. Did we decide that it was just a little too sensitive? I mean, it is true that some people don't like to answer that question. And I guess in sort of support of not having it on there, we do have sort of a, do you own your own home or do you rent your own home? But that isn't necessarily an indicator of, income levels. So I wonder, did we accidentally leave that off or did we purposely leave that off? That's what I was going to ask you guys.
My recollection, and could be wrong, was that we purposely left it off. But what are the other members' recollection? Or what are your wishes? Is there value?
Yeah, that's the question is there value in what we would get from that? And, what would we do with it?
I think that was why we might have, I remember having a conversation. Will?
Yeah, I do. I remember having the conversation. I think what we had said was, if we know that whether or not they own or rent a home, if we know their level of education, I think there was something else if we know about them that that probably is enough of an indicator to know whether or not, probably, likely where they're at, because we're afraid that by listing income, that's probably not a question that a lot of people tend to answer, and whether or not that it had enough value to us that we couldn't get basically, I guess, what we were looking for from the other questions. Now, we could reopen that discussion, but I think that was where we went the last time.
Yeah, I think I sit here and think about, okay, we're looking at developing policies. I mean, that's the outcome and recommendations. So the demographics are an interesting addition, but in totality, it shouldn't matter the policies and stuff should come from the totality of the survey. And to break it down, and income is a biased thing. And so like William said, if we're looking at, we have home ownership and education, we're going to be able to sort of pull apart sort of the socioeconomic aspect and probably have enough for the city of Wausau to break down, what our demographic split is when it comes to that kind of thing.
So I think what you're hearing is it was a deliberate decision not to put it in.
All right, I appreciate that. And my colleague April thought that as well, but we just wanted to verify that, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about that? To your point, did April, I'm sorry, was it Olivia or April? Did they mention sort of their take on it, or why they thought, because obviously we're not naturally survey, we don't naturally put together surveys, but I'd just be interested in their take if they mentioned why they thought that they definitely think that should be in there, or did they?
I don't want to necessarily respond for them. I know Olivia's on the line, but I suspect it's because a lot of surveys, on all sorts of topics will often have that as a demographic question, just because sometimes income really is something people want to correlate to certain policy outcomes. I'm not saying it's necessary at all. I just think it's, you do see that quite a lot on surveys. So it was just a question I think that got raised. Nobody was trying to force fit it in there. Will, we just wanted to just double check that with you.
No, I didn't think force fed, but I just was wondering in terms of, that was something maybe you were saying that we definitely maybe should have, and as people that don't normally put together a survey, we just were maybe missing the point. So just wanted to make sure.
Any other questions or comments on that? If not, Eric, if you want to continue?
Sure. So, pardon me, if we could get your feedback on this latest draft, like in the next couple days, let's say by Wednesday at noon, does that give you enough time? I don't know. We just want to make sure that we move the process forward, and I just want to tell you what that process is going to look like. So once we get this last round of feedback, we're going to finalize it and, draft, put it into the, same form or format it, depending on any of your suggestions. We also will then translate it. I have purposely not had it translated yet because I just want to make sure we're not going to add anything major. Of course, if there's some minor tweaks around Tuesday, Wednesday, we can then add those to the translation. The translation won't take very long, but it'll at least take a couple days to get that into Spanish and Hmong and make sure we're, everyone's happy with it. We will upload that online so that there will be, the first thing you see when you go to the URL, which will be something fairly simple like whips.org/WPD survey, something like that. You will have a choice immediately to take it in English, Hmong, or Spanish, and that will automatically just take you to the right language survey. As far as the rest of the distribution, we have the mailing service all lined up, ready to go to put out, I think we decided about 5,000 copies of the survey to the Wausau city limits. And, beyond that, I think this group had decided that we are not going to survey it beyond the city limits. However, we will be accepting, surveys online from people who live outside of Wausau, so it's not like we won't somehow have some data, but we're not going to be as scientific about the data outside of Wausau itself. And that survey, they'll print up stuff, mail the survey with return postage. I was in talking it over with some staff and and John and the mayor. I think a decision was made that it would be better to have the survey returned to the city and to have that, gathered by the city, put in one place in an office, and then whips can come by and pick up the surveys. We felt that because we felt it would actually be a little safer and a little more convenient for people who, let's say, wanted to drop it off in person or even mail it, and they're not sure, like, what is this address? Where is it? I think it's pretty clear now. It's at City Hall. There's also a drop box there the mayor said we could use, which we will. At the university, you don't quite know where you're going necessarily if you haven't been there. The building where my office is actually locked to the general public, so I think we just feel it would be very confusing to have them send it to the university. So we hope everybody's okay with that. Does anybody have any concerns?
Any questions, concerns? Pat?
I don't have any concerns about that, but Eric, if somebody receives a mailed survey and their main English or language is Spanish or Hmong, is there going to be like a cover sheet that says if you prefer to take this in your native language, go here online? Is that how that's going to work?
I'm actually glad you raised that because that's not currently there, but I agree that it needs to be. And let me see if I have, I'm going to look at the version that I sent you. Do I even have on there? We should have on there that they can take this online. Okay, we do have that. I think it'll go right there on the cover page. Pat, I don't know if you can see that cover page, but right near the bottom of the message, it says, if you prefer, you may take the survey online here. And I think what we'll do is in that blank space, we'll have, take the survey in Hmong, go here.
Bingo, yeah, that would work really well.
Do we,
Yeah, so
would there be an option too to request a survey in a different language?
Printed?
There are some people who just don't access the internet. And if we're trying to be inclusive, if you would like a copy of this in Spanish or Hmong, please contact X and we can mail that to them. Because I think that we presuppose that everybody that wants to take it is either English proficient or will use the internet. And I don't think that's correct.
well, okay, so, sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Was somebody going to say something else?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I agree, and I think that one thing I failed to mention is that we will be making copies, paper copies, in both Spanish and Hmong. And the idea was, you're right, it's not going to go to the households, but it will be available. And we haven't decided all of the places yet where that will be available, but our thought was that we would give a stack of surveys to some of the H2N workers, the Hmong and Hispanic network workers who are going out to the farms, to different events like Juneteenth and other events where Spanish language is being used. Churches out in there's a church out in Abbotsford, the parish out there, and we'll provide some hard copies so that people who come in can take them. And we haven't figured out where all those areas are yet, so we're kind of in the process, but that will be available that way. But I agree that we should make it available to send out, because it wouldn't be a lot of sweat to just, if somebody called up and said, hey, I need a survey, to send one out. It wouldn't be a problem. So I think we should definitely put that on there. I guess my only question is, do we need to put it on there in Spanish, for example, in Hmong, or can we just put it in English and say, if you have questions or require assistance such as a language survey, please contact us here, something like that. But I agree that should be on here.
It would have to be in their language, wouldn't it? Otherwise, it's going to blow right past them.
I would think a brief paragraph in each, in Hmong and in Spanish would be helpful.
Another option that we could do is just a statement sort of near the top, because we don't want to make it too far down,
Right.
that says, for Spanish language instructions. Well, I don't know. What do you think about this? We could just have them go online, because we actually have a page that's set up. It's not visible to the public yet because we're still waiting on the URLs and things like that for the survey, but we could have literally a phrase, in Spanish, in Hmong, that says, for instructions on completing the survey in Spanish or Hmong, go to this URL.
But again, that's fine for the internet savvy and internet accessible individuals. And if our goal is to have something that might be available for the people that are not internet, can't access the internet, we would need to have something. So perhaps just a statement that if you would like a copy of this in Spanish, please contact. If you would like a copy of the survey in Hmong, please contact toward the beginning. And then we could mail them the survey.
Okay, that's-
Either complete it online or request a hard copy. I think we could put those in there. What are your
Responding to
thoughts?
that, they would get the instructions and the survey, so that would be a good way to do it.
But again, if you're driving people to online and they're, if they don't have access to the internet, so if we just think about how we would frame that, and maybe Eric, I can think about that and send you something,
Right, put in a phone number.
put in a phone number, and where would could that phone number be? It could be yours, or Katie, I'm looking to somebody at City Hall.
Yep, we can get a mailbox or something set up that's similar to what we did in the past.
A dedicated phone line through Jerry.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I'm speaking for him, but I'm thinking that shouldn't be a problem.
So can I just talk that through with you? So the idea would be, they're still not going to get a person, but when they call up, there's a message in Spanish or in Hmong, and it will say something like, to get a copy of the survey, leave a message here or something, or request, please request and provide your name, address, and phone number, or whatever, something like that.
Yes.
We can probably even use those same mailboxes that we were using. We'll just re-record the messages.
Does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah, no, definitely makes sense. Thank you. And I think we can definitely add something here at the top of the survey to that effect.
And then I have a
Yes.
quick question in terms of just functionality for the online users, because I know you had said like in the survey, some of the questions, like if you click no, then it'll skip you forward to the other questions, past those related questions since they're not applicable. Is there something we could do like that where the first question would be, are you a Spanish speaker or Hmong, or in terms of language, and you just click the button and then it clicks you to directly, so they don't have to go through so many clicks, that just automatically takes them to then the survey that's in Spanish or Hmong, like with those other questions, or no?
Yes, that's actually the plan. So the very first thing people will see is not the cover page that you see on the paper version I sent you, but it will be, to continue in Spanish, click here; to continue in English, click here; to continue in Hmong, click here. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the plan.
Great. Anything else from a process perspective?
I think, any questions, John? Or are you asking me to continue?
I'm asking you to continue.
So I think the biggest issue going forward is obviously, any final comments you have about the survey itself and the formatting. And then secondly, really where we need to, how and where we spread the word. I think this is really going to be critical to get people to take it. And of course, even if, we do flyers, which we will, so we're going to be creating a flyer and have that in all 3 languages and, have that available at the city hall, and we'll post it around. Now that COVID is fortunately kind of not quite as prevalent, we can now get out and put some posters around the city. But at the same time, I think we all know that word of mouth is hugely important. So anything we can do on social media and even just around people that we know to invite them to take the survey would be really, really, I think, beneficial. Because even if we, get some kind of an average or below average return rate of 20%, which is fine, it's actually going to, that will be within the statistical significant realm that we're looking to get about 1,000 surveys back. We still would like to hear from people, perhaps who don't receive the survey, or certain targeted populations which we know are going to have a harder time, responding to that paper survey. So anyway, just getting the word out is going to be critical. So I'm overemphasizing this on purpose. And we'll be providing you not only a flyer and a PDF of the flyer, but like an ad tile, sort of like a little blurb that you can put in a newsletter or post on Facebook or something like that.
I have a question, John, if I can jump in. The
Please.
ones that are going to be mailed, those are going to be random or darn near everybody, or how's that going to be handled? And I'm wondering if there's, in a survey like this, if there would be any value in trying to control who responds to see that it's more random, or do we just want big numbers?
It actually is random for the paper distribution, so it'll be essentially 5,000 surveys going to random addresses within the city limits of Wausau. And the hope is that we get, if that's all we're relying on, and we didn't have anyone else taking the online version or anything else, we'd hope that would get us somewhere close to statistical significance. It would from a confidence level, but the issue is really, I think, is going to be trying to capture some of the population which is not likely to fill out a survey, whether because they don't collect their mail, they are from a certain demographic group that tends not to respond to surveys. So that's where I think the online version really comes in and makes a difference. And quite frankly, we may have to go out to some of the Spanish language community, to the Hmong language community, and do some convincing, that the survey is important to take, so that we make sure those groups are represented.
I was just thinking that if I took a stack of surveys to my neighborhood association meeting, I'd be getting a bunch of people who were generally satisfied with the services in the community, and you get a lot different response than you might from your random sample. Maybe
That's
it's still
true.
valuable.
That's true, but on the other hand, it's not going to hurt to have more. It won't make a difference, frankly, probably from a statistical standpoint, based on what you just outlined there, and who comes to those meetings. But on the other hand, if it helps get the word out and gives people a sense that that their participation is valuable, it can have some other benefits.
That's a plus, yeah.
And
Please
again,
do.
the survey doesn't drive decisions. The survey is a tool that we use to evaluate whether or not there are issues or problems that we're not seeing, and it's part of the original feedback that we had through the listening sessions, and the survey is a part of it, and then we'll go into the focus groups and identify. The one thing is it does establish your baseline if we conduct surveys in the future. But, it's not as if you're at 54% for this or 73, won't necessarily drive a policy decision. It's more enlightening as to what the perceptions of the community are.
The good news is that in real time, we'll be able to tell at any given moment, certain demographic features of who's taken the survey and who has not taken the survey. So if we just take race and ethnicity as one of the most common and probably ones that we'll look at closely, we'll be able to literally check that on a daily basis. I don't know that we need to every day, but we'll check it and see, are we getting responses among community from African Americans in our community in proportion that we would expect to the population. And then, we can target some of those populations if necessary, depending on what we find.
Any other questions for Eric? So if not, if you could provide comments to him by noon on Wednesday relative to any concerns or questions or additions to the survey, that would be helpful. And then he'll move forward. I know we're working on a press release for the city to roll it out, and we'll make sure that we will, as part of the rollout, that all of you are aware of when it goes out. So if you get questions, you can help support those efforts. We'll probably reach out to the council and other elected officials as well. Anything else you'd like to add, Eric?
Just one last thing. I think I mentioned this, but as you're thinking about the survey, looking at it and commenting on it, I know it's hard to sometimes just literally sit down, take the survey without, thinking through it because you're attentive to both, a lot of different things happening at once. For that reason, I might suggest that if you're going to print it out or you're able to print it out, maybe just print it out and ask one of your family members to take it or someone to take it, and just to get a sense of the timing and report that back. So we're sort of doing this on a bit of a random basis with people that we know and some that we don't. And what we're so far finding is that, at least in the current iteration, it's about 8 to 9 minutes if you don't fill out if you haven't had an interaction with the police, you don't fill out those yeses on the conditional questions at the end. But we haven't had a lot of people fill it out who have had interactions with the police over the last 12 months. So we're kind of curious, especially how long it will take if they fill out those yes questions as well. We suspect it's going to be over 10. We just don't know how much over. So it looks like on average, if we're, so far, we're probably a little under 10 minutes, which I think is really great. So that was our goal.
Pat?
In light of that, I would put that in that opening page instead of should take you 12 minutes, because even 2 minutes is going to be a deterrent. If I think I can get something done in less than 10, I might go for it, but if it's 12, and then, that's not a make or break, but I think it sounds more appealing if it's should take less than 10 minutes. Maybe use that wording.
Yeah, I agree. This was a placeholder. Thank you. That's it, though, for me.
All right, Eric, thank you and your team for all of your efforts, and we look forward to seeing the survey. So again,
Okay.
please review
Thank,
it. Go ahead.
thank you.
You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to leave.
I'm heading out, guys. I love you all, but going back to my life. Take care, guys.
Take care. All right. The next item is to pick up on the discussion that we've had in the past, and we apologize for not putting it in today's packet, but the material that we shared with you on May 21st relative to the recommendations that were made in the President's Commission's 21st Century Policing Report, the recommendations from the Wisconsin Professional Police Association Blueprint for Change, as well as the recommendations that are currently before the state legislature through the Speaker's Task Force. Those were incorporated into into a spreadsheet. We asked Chief Levin to go through and look at those in the context of which of them are we doing, which of them, there are a number of them that are not appropriate for us, but we thought we would capture them all and spend time today to go through one or two of those pillars, if we could, and determine which of them we would want to either begin to develop recommendations on, or determine that we're already doing it. I think it's important that we track those that we have accomplished as a community, those that are goals, and those that we don't think are appropriate just for tracking purposes. So is it possible to poll that? You just sent it for the public? Is there any value to?
They can go back to the packet from May 19th.
All right.
Re-pull it up.
The May 19th packet if you go into the city's calendar and go to May 19th and go to the Wausau Policing Task Force, there's the agenda in the packet. If you wish to pull that up, that would be available to you to review. So with that, Ben, do you want to just make some, begin to make some comments relative to the recommendations, or should we just get into the pillars?
I suppose I could start by making some comments. So if we're just talking about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, if you have your spreadsheet up in front of you, you'll see a lot of green on the spreadsheet if you have the one that I sent, which is, I use the green, yellow, and red. Green means that, at least by my analysis, we are doing, we have implemented those recommendations. Yellow means we have in some level, and red means we have not.
Hang on, Ben, we're trying, I think the one that they have is not the green, yellow, red.
Oh, I think I sent it to you.
Yeah, and I assumed you sent it to Jean, so I apologize. So can
You want me just to email it?
you email it to Jean and we can pull it up?
Sure.
Email it to me, and then I'll just pull it up here on the screen, if you don't mind.
So we're
I'll
going to
just
pull
send
it up.
here. Yeah.
All right, does everybody have it? And we have it up? Go
So-
ahead, Ben.
So if we just want to start with the first pillar, if you look at 1.5.2, law enforcement agencies should institute residency incentive programs such as resident officer programs. And that's a recommendation that is regarding police officers living within the city limits of the jurisdiction. And so I have that marked as yellow. We do have a program within community development called Live It Up Wausau, where, officers, actually an employee with the city of Wausau can get loan assistance for down payments with their home purchase within the city of Wausau. And that's a program that's not just for the city of Wausau, but for a lot of other businesses in the area and in the community. That is, I think that's currently on hold, is what I was told by community development. And it's not specific to a resident officer program. When I first started in the city of Wausau, there was a program specific to police officers and maybe firefighters too, I don't remember, where there was down payment assistance, where you could get $5,000 for, if you purchased a home within the city of Wausau, and it was a forgivable loan if you stayed there for 10 years. So we don't have a resident officer program, but we have something available to city employees. That's why it's yellow. Moving down to recommendation 1.7, that is in regards to survey and tracking community feeling and sentiment about law enforcement. And we don't do that right now, but the WIP survey that we just finished talking about should accomplish that objective if we do that on an ongoing basis. Moving down to action item 1.8.5, law enforcement agencies should be encouraged to explore more flexible staffing models. That's red. I think if you read the report, what they talked about was like they likened a flexible staffing model to what is most commonly, I think, associated with nursing programs, where you have the ability to work a variety of different shifts and you get to select those shifts and shift schedules based on, I assume, based on seniority and what your interests are. I don't think we have the staff levels to accomplish that type of objective. So that's why I marked it red, and I'm not sure that we can accomplish that. Recommendation 1.9, law enforcement agencies should build relationships based on trust with immigrant communities. This is central to overall public safety. I guess I'm not sure what they're referencing in terms of immigrant communities. I mean, obviously we have really good partnerships and relationships with, Hmong American Association and other organizations in the community, but I'm just not exactly sure what they're referencing in terms of immigrant communities, and we could always do better, so that's marked that yellow.
Ben, based upon the discussions that we had with the Hmong leaders in particular and other, I'm just wondering if you've got the neighbor-to-neighbor program where you deal with neighborhoods, if you will, with engagement with your community policing officers. One of the things that I left at the meeting with the Hmong leaders was perhaps because of some of the cultural and other issues, it might make sense for us to look at expanding that neighbor-to-neighbor concept to the Hmong community, clan leaders, and others. And I would imagine that if we looked at something along the model of the H2N, the Hmong and Hispanic network, that there might be some opportunities for us to look at some of those targeted populations. So what are your thoughts on something like that, given in one case there's significant cultural, well, in both cases there's cultural differences that lead to confusion, the role of the male in a marriage, and what that means, and there are some educational opportunities for us. There are cultural differences. We've heard many times in the past from leaders is that this is best handled within the clan or others. So are there opportunities for us to do some outreach in that area?
Yes. So
if we could flag that as a potential issue. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say so. In my own sort of working at Wisconsin Judicare, the state bar, we just watched a video on Hmong culture and the law, dealing with Hmong marriage and getting divorced through the Hmong culture versus getting divorced, through U.S. Legal law. And there are important distinctions and differences. And in terms of being a bridge, sort of as an attorney, being present there as they work out some of the things could sort of relate that. Maybe there are some ways that maybe too, just getting some of that knowledge in terms of the police force, maybe on a training like that, may help them in terms of bridging some of the gaps in terms of what I call it cultural competence. So I think that could be helpful. That was helpful to me, I'll say that.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful.
Other thoughts? Before we move on to Pillar 2, you had checked green as you are doing those things. Could you take, I think we probably all agree that there's a lot that's taking place, but from the task force perspective, are there opportunities for us to strengthen our activities in any of the areas that he's delineated as green? Are there any concerns that we could do more? Are we, are you in agreement? And fundamentally, if you have a different opinion, I think it's important for us to have that discussion now as we move ahead. Do you think it's worthwhile to just quickly run through each of them? I defer to you.
I mean, I do have one kind of percolating question, but I don't know, and this is on my part, I don't know if this is, because, we talk about whether or not this is a overall or this is a Wausau specific issue. In terms of looking at some of the numbers on disparities in terms of arrests, now I know we've gone through numbers in terms of arrests overall, but breaking those down because, for instance, I looked at the ACLU website, and again, it says Marathon County, so I don't know where it says, Black Americans are 20.4% more times likely to be arrested here in Marathon County. And I guess my question more specifically is, what does that look like? Is it as pronounced, because Wausau is only one small part of the whole county. Is that as pronounced here? And if so, is there a specific area more than others that are then causing, because, the Wausau Police Department, I think, does a great job. So is there one, if that is the case as well here, is there one specific or more specific reason or policy? Because I think that the training is on that would be causing those disparities if we have those here. But like I said, I don't know if it's more just Marathon County in whole, because obviously there's more police departments and every police department does it different, or are some of those same sort of disparities in terms of overall, when you see the numbers in terms of Black Americans, do you see that here as well?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I think the numbers for Black Americans in the city of Wausau exceeds the rate at which they're in our population. The population is 1.5% African American, and I think I don't remember what percentage of our arrests are of African Americans. My recollection is it was 8 or 10%. And I think the same is true for traffic stops and that kind of thing. So I think the question that I asked early on when we started talking about those things is, what should they be? Should they be as that, as a person, as the Black people appear in our population? Should we be at 1 and 1.5% for arrests or traffic stops? I don't know if that's the answer to that is yes or if it's not. I'm not sure exactly how to analyze that. Is because, why do people come into contact with law enforcement? We know there's a lot of underlying reasons why people come into contact with police. Potentially there is, obviously that's one reason, could be racism, right? And racism on the part of law enforcement, which I don't think is the case here, but I don't have any evidence to tell you that it doesn't exist here. So I don't know how to analyze that, and I think that's one thing that potentially could come out of the task force is figuring out who we could ask to help us understand that data.
I guess
If I could just interject, Chad Billups will be at one of our next meetings, and Chad's from the Sheriff's Department. He has that demographic information, both in terms of arrest as well as the jail population. So that might give you some of that information that you're looking for. It's composite information, but I think he can break it down by arresting authority. But I will ask him if he can do that. For instance, the jail population encompasses the county, but I know they track, because I see the daily reports, by, which is the arresting entity. So their new tracking system gives them a great deal of ability to do some breakdowns. So if you have specific requests, either before Chad presents or afterward, we can probably get you some good data.
Okay, yeah, because I guess the thing with looking at that data is that then when you look at it and compare it to the white population, which is much more, I think they're about equal, which would seem kind of off. So I guess I would want to know, is there something? Is it, because other places, I think like Milwaukee recently instituted a program, and they end up looking at it and pointed it toward their drug enforcement policy and had a dramatic drop. I'm not sure if that's it. I think like Chairman Robinson said, we'll need to look at that and see if there's ways that we can sort of improve that disparity. I think would be one thing I'd like to see.
Chair,
Go ahead, Pat.
I wonder if I could ask Will to clarify the ACLU numbers, that if you're black, you're 20% more likely to be arrested, or 20 times as likely? 20 times would be scary.
It says 20.4 times.
All right, so I think, Katie, that was one of the points that you had raised in your email from Friday. So I think it bears for us to get that information. We can go back and revisit any of these recommendations based upon what we get at those future meetings. But I think what we were trying to do is to see if there was value in us looking at some of those recommendations. And I think we had that discussion relative to the cultural competencies and other things. But, Will, I may strongly encourage you to hold on to that thought. And I think that I think you'll see some issues relative to the cash bonds that lead to some disparities when we get into that. So I think that there will be some issues that are beyond the control of the Wausau Police Department that may affect population percentages and in the jail. But I think we should see that information, and Chad's agreed to come to hopefully our next meeting.
Sounds good, and obviously there's a difference that you want to make between arrest and charging. And then separate from that issue, one of the other things I think, and I know we've talked a lot about CART. I think we could have one of those people that work with the police officers in those situations kind of give a little bit more meat to the bone in terms of how they assist in those types of situations.
Maybe if I could just take a side step, and we've talked about this with the mayor and with Ben, and what we were looking for, and I would encourage you to think about, what do we need to make decisions? And what we were looking for is inviting the United Way in, because they've got the life, well, it's not their report, they're associated with it. The women's community from the perspective of domestic violence, social services from the perspective of child welfare, to come in one night and give us an overview of the services and the needs that they think are out there. And then we thought we would bring in Chad Laura Yari, who's in charge of the Justice Alternatives, and ask the District Attorney, Teresa Weststone, to come in and talk about it from the perspective of the law enforcement, the jail system, and how we deal with diversions and how we deal with potentially charging and other things. So those were sort of where we were going, and if you'd like to hear and have some discussions of other issues such as CART, that's fine, because I think that the consensus that I've sensed of this group is that there's strong support for an expansion of CART. And what might that look like? We can do that, but keep it, what else and who else would you like to hear from? We'll have the survey results, we'll have the focus group results by the end of summer that will drive us, but then we'll need to begin to put together our recommendations, and sooner or later we need to get to that decision-making mode. So we'll ask, I think your CART officer would be happy to come
Yeah, we can certainly have our CART officer, or are you referencing a crisis professional that they work with from North Central Healthcare?
Or both?
Yeah, I think both.
All right. As we look through others, I think that, the culture of transparency and accountability is there. I think we've heard about cases, the investigations on use of force and others. Anything else in those pillars? I think that, to the credit of the police department, that they've been at the forefront of trying to develop recommendations or develop and implement policies that address many of those questions. But do you have any concerns, Pat?
Yeah, under Pillar 2, line 46, there's one that I just don't understand. It says, recommendation, law enforcement agencies are encouraged to adopt identification procedures that implement scientifically supported practices that eliminate or minimize presenter bias or influence. What is that?
That's referencing our policy and protocol in terms of show-ups or lineups of offenders to witnesses or victims of crime. So when we have a very specific process when we put together a lineup when somebody is a victim of crime and we want to show them a photo array of 5, 6, or 7 suspects, and they are to pick out which person perpetrated the crime against them. That's what they're saying is the way in which you do that lineup can result in bias based on how you present that. So we follow the best practice recommendations on how we do our photo lineups and our show-ups.
Okay, yeah, I thought it might be how persons were identified in paperwork or something like that. So, no, that's good, thank you.
All right. Other questions on Pillar 1 as we look at Pillar 1? And again, for the public, these are based upon the 21st Century Policing Commission's recommendations from the Presidential Commission. Other thoughts on Pillar 1? And I think one of the things we'll want to do as it relates specifically to 1.7 is that while WIPS is doing this, is I think one of the recommendations is we'll want to establish the survey as a baseline and to periodically conduct updates and make that as a recommendation. Is there consensus on trying to save that? I know, Mike, you've talked about that, the importance of that, and that would be consistent with what the Wisconsin Professional Police Association does. And so you'd have your core questions you'd ask to determine whether or not there's been movement. Other questions relative to 1? All right, you want to go into Pillar 2?
You bet. So I'll jump to the line 2.2.6, which is line 44 on the spreadsheet. And this is a recommendation that law enforcement agencies establish a serious incident review board that is comprised of sworn staff and community members. And these review boards would be to review serious incidents like officer-involved shootings or other serious incidents. So we have internal mechanisms to review serious uses of force to include officer-involved shootings. Obviously we have an external agency that investigates officer-involved shootings. We also have an internal review process in place for that, but we don't have a mechanism for community members to participate in that process. it has been our practice to release video footage and reports as quickly as we can, but we don't have a formal mechanism to have citizens participate in that review process. And frankly, I think an agency our size, that would be very difficult because in order to have citizens participate in that review board, they're going to need to have pretty extensive knowledge of law enforcement practices, use of force guidelines like we talked about last week, and the frequency of the events within the city of Wausau that would rise to the level of a serious incident are pretty few and far between. So to maintain that review board would be a difficult process in the city of Wausau.
Any thoughts? You know, that whole issue of citizen engagement was, you know, in our charge. And, you know, we currently rely on the statutes to drive that through the creation of the Police and Fire Commission. And, you know, they've got the neighbor-to-neighbor program, which engages the public, but not in a crisis mode. Are you comfortable with it? Do you want to save that for discussion later? You know, in light of it being highlighted, or are you comfortable with the you know, again, with the present
I think
process?
I think for me right now, some of this, I am sort of waiting for the survey to come back.
All right.
And I think that some of these it would be interesting to hear if the community is coming back and saying they are having transparency issues and they are having, respect and trust and all this stuff, then I think that, that feedback we need to take and act on, and this might be an avenue that would open that up. And so, I appreciate Ben's point, and I think it might just be some communication to the community about this is what happens. It might just simply be an educational aspect. But I hesitate to make some, I think it's great to hear this conversation, but I also think that we're trying to act on behalf of the community, and that key part's still coming.
Well stated and well taken. I think I think the survey and focus groups, again, might enlighten us as to whether or not there are some public, public concerns or trust issues relative to that review process, so we can revisit that at a later date. Other thoughts? If you want to keep going?
You bet. So just a couple rows down, recommendation 2.6, and this is law enforcement agencies should be encouraged to collect, maintain, and analyze demographic data on all detentions. I marked this yellow. We obviously collect all of this data because much of it's been shared with you. We don't disaggregate by school and non-school contacts, but we do keep separate data around school contacts, which we can provide to you when Lieutenant Seiler comes to speak in regard to our involvement in the schools.
And again, some of that information we will get from the Sheriff's Department, and I think you're using the same system,
We do.
so we can look at that. And lacrosse, didn't lacrosse track that information? Kitty, I'm looking to you.
I know we talked a little bit about what they were doing from a whole kind of justice system. I don't know exactly what they tracked, though. I don't know if that's something that we actually...
We track all of the contacts that we have in school, the law enforcement contacts with citations and arrests and emergency detentions. We have all that data,
Okay.
so we can provide that all to you.
Are there other items in
That's all I have in Pillar 2.
2? Any questions, comments? Or, I think we'll be revisiting these at a later date, but we wanted to begin that process of just going through the recommendations. And again, if you think that, if you have a difference of opinion relative to what the community or the actual practices are perceived in the community, we need to have those discussions here, because Those will come up at some point in the future. Do you want to keep going? Thoughts? Again, I think Mike raises an excellent point that some of our responses may be shaped by what we hear. And I think we're going to get a lot of information back relative to the third area, the technology and social media, through that survey result. So my suggestion is maybe we wait with that one until we get the survey results, unless you feel that there's value in moving ahead with that today. Any thoughts? Is this a worthwhile process for us just to begin to focus on what we're doing, where we're at? Pat, you're nodding yes?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're coming in, every couple of weeks or 3 weeks and kind of starting from scratch, and this gives us some specific things that, here's what you really ought to be thinking about, and I think that's helpful to me rather than have all this general information floating around.
Well, in light of that and the fact that you didn't get the red, green, blue, or red, green, yellow one until tonight, and I apologize for that. Maybe what we should do is just encourage you to, now that you have them, go back and look at them. Look at those that are highlighted to see, yellow and red, to see if we're in agreement, and green. But if we have specific recommendations that we might want to put in a parking lot to bring up at a later date, I think that would be helpful. But I'm also, and I had forgotten, and I thank you for raising that whole issue of the school program. We had talked about that. That's one of the recommendations of the speakers task force, in that relative to what those programs are, and we had talked about trying to gather that information. Are there other topics outside of what we outlined earlier relative to the domestic abuse and women, domestic abuse, the issue of child welfare services, the issue of sort of that United Way life report and trauma, and the whole issue of who's in the jail, what are the data that we have relative to arrests going into the jail, where are we with the diversion programs, and where are we from a DA's perspective? Are there other issues? We'll get into the school officer, the CART team.
Are you hoping to get through a couple of these topics at one meeting, or are you thinking one meeting for Chad and one meeting for women's community and one meeting for et cetera?
My thought is to package the women's community, United Way, and social services in one meeting, and that we would package the jail, the jail, justice alternatives, and the DA in a meeting. We can always do follow-up, but I think if we don't, we'll never get done. And I think that there's so much there's so much sharing between those entities that it would be helpful to have them together. So we've reached out to a number of them, and they're willing to participate, and some of them we need to do additional follow-up with.
I would agree with that. I think that's the way we should package them, because then they're going to have presentations, and we would hopefully have maybe some questions and follow-up. And if we were packaging too much, be here all night. So, and I don't know if we didn't have as in-depth as a discussion as we may want to. So I agree with you, Chairman, that that's the right way to do it.
And then we would look at CART, that follow-up on CART, and school as one, and then somewhere along there, we're going to be into the survey results and then the focus groups. So, as I see it, that's 4 meetings. If we can, I think doing more than 2 pillars in a night means that it's difficult for us to really comprehend them. And if we can build a pillar or 2 into each of those meetings, we can then, come fall, be in that recommendation, developing our recommendations. And we do have to take our product out for public input and public hearing before presenting it. But, so we've got at least 4 meetings, probably 5 meetings, 6 meetings yet to come, based on what we've got laid out, unless you see it differently, or I don't see that we can do it much quicker. Ben, anything you want to add relative to what we've done? The goal would be then to try to bring the law enforcement component into the next meeting, and then deal with the United Way and the social services network, if you will, into the following one. Then we'll deal with the cart and the school officer in that area, and subject to change based upon where we are with the focus groups in the survey. We also wanted to provide, at one of the upcoming meetings, an update on the state legislation. We had talked about that. There are a number of initiatives that came out of the Speaker's Task Force that are currently in bill form. Just to update you on where those are, and should there be any legislation on the federal level, we may update you on that as well. So anything else that you think we should be looking at? Any data needs, Pat?
Under this agenda item, one of the things that's listed is the WPPA Blueprint for Change. Are we going to touch on that tonight, or are we going to hold off?
What we'll do, and we'll incorporate those into the various pillars. Most of the points that were raised by the Professional Police Association are embodied in the 21st Century Commission's report. The language may be a little bit different. A good number of them also focus on officer welfare and training, but I think that they're captured. We just wanted to make sure that we dealt with all of them sooner or later, but we'll finesse the list and make sure that we move some of them up into those pillars as appropriate. And then we'll have that report on the Speaker's Task Force. Other questions, thoughts? I'm seeing nods of consensus as to the approach. Again, any other issues, and we can always expand the list, but I think that we're just trying to frame where we're going and try to get some sort of light at the end of the tunnel as to where we're going. All right, then when do we meet? This seems to be a good night. I think July 5th might be problematic.
That's a bad day, the 7th. I mean, it's a good day. The fire chief's swearing in is gonna be that evening.
Okay. What about the 12th?
This room is not available.
Let me throw out, what about the 12th at a different venue? I'm also thinking of potentially the assembly chambers of the assembly room at the courthouse, given the fact that we're using the DA, others I could check on the availability of it. What would you think? That keeps us to a date that seems to work with the task force members?
I think that's a conflict with Park and Rec Committee, Pat, I think you're on that, right? It's the 12th of July.
That's the 5th.
Which would be the 5th, which is a observed holiday. So that's what's on the council chambers docket for the 12th is the Park and Rec
Oh,
Committee.
Yeah, that's a problem then, yeah. I didn't have that moved over in my calendar.
We could push it to the 9th. Summer is tough for lots of reasons. We can push it to the 19th, which gets us a little bit farther out than I'd like. but we're running into conflicts.
What about like Wednesday, the 30th of June?
Hang on, Park and Rec is 4:30, so if we met at 6:30, I think we'd be okay.
Agenda tight.
Pardon?
Keep your
The-
agenda tight.
HR committee is also the second Monday, so we just had it, so I think that's why the Park and Rec was pushed back later that night on the
Okay.
12th.
Never mind.
So we're off the 12th? I'm free on the 30th. Are you others? June 30th? At 6:30. I don't know if our speakers are, but I will see if they are.
Same time, 6:30.
6:30. Let's tentatively look at that, and we'll, if that doesn't work, we'll do a doodle survey. But I'll try to confirm that tomorrow. We'll do it here. If there's not a conflict, we'll do it here, just because it's easier for people to remember. So we're not going to different locations. If you're like me, this meeting should be here. When they let us into the building. Right, Olivia? All right, we had a motion made before we started the meeting to adjourn.
I can't second my own motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you.